as of now, we are having around 60 participants, and all of them are from different backgrounds, majority of them being students, as well as professionals from IT sectors and corporates, as well as academicians. So before we start the session, there is a small request to all our participants. The request is to please keep your system on mute, and you can also off your video footage so that you can see only the speakers who are speaking. Also, there is a request by Das sir that he wants to have more of an interactive session. So all those who are having questions, what they can do is they can utilize the chat box of this Zoom group chat, and you can keep posting questions here, and we'll try to accommodate as many questions as possible. So now I would like to introduce our guest speaker, Professor Lalit Kumar Das sir, who has pioneered the industrial design education at IIT Delhi and has been associated with almost every premier design institute in the country and even abroad. And that too in different capacities, including teaching, PhD supervision, jury panel, selection committee expert, and many more. He was engaged in the development of national design policy and is also a member of National Committee on Design and Artisan Development. He is currently a distinguished honorary faculty at Department of Design, Delhi Technological University. Professor Das would be speaking on the topic design, innovation, and pandemic. And let us hear from you, sir. We all are waiting for you.
Thank you very much. Are you able to see me?
Sir, we can see you.
Okay, good. And are you able to see the my screen also?
No, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, you have to share the screen.
Let me share the screen, sir. On the bottom side, you can see a green button there. To share your screen.
Share the screen. Share screen.
Yes, sir, we can see your screen now.
You can see my screen now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Last 2 months, I've been really thinking all the time about pandemic. And we are also having our classes online. I see certain merit in it, having online classes. And we need to combine offline and online together. Because in an online course, I find that all the students are sitting in the front row. Otherwise, in a normal class, some students would come late, they'll sit at the back, and when they come late, they are sulking at the back of the class. Okay? But in an online, everybody is in the front row. We are sitting in a round table. And so there is more discussion. And perhaps there is a merit in that, because you are less afraid, maybe, and there's less eye-to-eye contact, maybe, and so you are feeling more free to ask questions, which is a very good thing. And I think that's why we need to bring about a combination of online and offline classes in order to improve the quality of our teaching. I will talk more on the pandemics. And one thing is becoming clear to everybody that post this pandemic, life would change tremendously. There is a certain change in our mindset that is happening. Okay? And so the designers have to play a very, very important role. What role would they have to play in this changed environment is something I would like you all to explore and think about. I will, in this talk, focus more on the pandemic side, less on the innovation and design thinking. Perhaps what I need to do is 4 or 5 lectures as a follow-up in which I would go into the nature of innovation and how is it that nature is so creative and so sustainable. this for me is a big challenge. And it poses a challenge to us designers also, okay? That nature is so creative and yet so sustainable. But we as designers and we as a society, we may be very proud of our creativity, but we find that our creativity on the whole is extremely problematic. And we need to relook at the way we approach design. And with this thought, I move over. And you see, what is happening is that SARS-CoV-2 has become the most disruptive innovation of the millennium. Okay, we've had pandemics in the past also, but it is in today's time when the society is so advanced, okay, and yet we find that when SARS-CoV-2 comes into being and permeates our environment, we find we are total loss as to what we have to do. Our only response is to shut down, to lock down. Okay. It has really brought us to our knees, and even the most advanced countries have not been able to respond. This itself shows that there has been something wrong in our thinking. We have spent a tremendous amount of money on defense, etc., but very little on the health sector. Even United States spent 700 billion on defense last year, and only 5 billion on health. And the result is that when SARS-CoV-2 came into being, and we are a total loss. The amount of lives that have been lost in USA and Germany, in Italy, France is totally unthinkable. These are all big, very, very powerful. They're superpowers. Okay. So there is a need for us to really think deeply as to what is happening. Where are we going wrong? Another thing that has happened is that this pandemic has brought about an importance of solidarity in an otherwise fragmented, disjointed, and an unhealthy competitive world. There is a growing feeling that the post-COVID-19 will be a different world. Okay, so we have joined up together, but fact remains that this solidarity to me seems to be only a temporary measure. Okay, we all the time, even the Prime Minister was saying, let us forget our differences and fight the coronavirus. But after we have won, then what will happen? Will the differences come back? Or will we join together in solidarity and rethink the direction in which we have to go? Perhaps what will happen is that it will bring simultaneous focus on many other man-made epidemics that have become central and endemic to our modern human civilization itself. Okay? Our society, our modern society is not without problems. Okay? There are immense problems, and somehow we have been brushing them under the carpet. We have seen climate change and how the US president has been backing out, and there has been criticism and so on and so forth. And the young people are thinking in one direction, and the older generation is thinking another direction, and so on. Perhaps there is a need to reflect on the type of problems, the other man-made epidemics that are central, and they are really endemic to the modern human civilization itself. What are these epidemics which are endemic to modern civilization? And there is the issue of fossil fuel burning, okay, carbon emissions. And it is now very well established that the increase in carbon emissions, increase in temperature, global temperature, is related to the extent of fossil fuel burning that has been taking place in the last a century or more. Okay? Climate change is just round the corner, but there doesn't seem to be much solidarity as far as climate change is concerned. Perhaps this will bring that change about. There is melting of glaciers, there's possibility of the ocean level rising. Immense problems because of the plastic waste. It is estimated by 2050, there'll be more plastic pieces in the ocean than there are fishes in the ocean. And we have seen images of birds on various islands who have been picking up plastic pieces and eating them, thinking that they are food. And in the process, these plastic pieces enter into their stomach. Obviously, they cannot be digested, and they die a very painful death. Okay. Then there are waste dumps that are happening. And then consumerism, of course, is the problem, which is creating all these things. Then there is this issue of chemical pesticides, chemical fertilizers, imbalance of soil chemistry, a deforestation that is happening, a pollution of water bodies that is happening. And one of the very joyful byproduct of this lockdown has been that people have suddenly discovered that our river bodies, our water bodies are becoming cleaner. The air is becoming cleaner. Okay? Birds are chirping more. Animals are feeling more free. Okay? Then there is poverty. There is social unrest. There is economic inequality. There is terrorism, religious and racial intolerance. Then there is obesity, diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular diseases, respiratory diseases, AIDS, SARS, MERS, COVID-19. Okay? And all these things are happening in the last 30, 40 years. If you total the amount of deaths that have happened in AIDS and SARS and MERS and COVID-19, it's immense. It almost equals the amount of death that happened in the 1918 flu pandemic. Then there's this issue of drug abuse, mental afflictions, depression, shootouts, child abuse, domestic violence. And perhaps all these issues are linked together somewhere down the line in the values that have chosen for our development. Behind all these endemics and pandemics is the assumption that consumption and production enhances well-being and it enhances wealth. So this is an assumption that we have been taking, and there have been a few countries like Bhutan who says, no, we will have another criteria rather than GDP, and maybe we have a happiness index and so on and so forth. But by and large, consumption and production has been the key line, key tone of our direction for well-being and growth and wealth. Okay? And there is one very interesting video which I would recommend that all of you should definitely see. And it is called the light bulb conspiracy. Please note it down. I think it's a very beautiful video. It tells us how we very consciously as a society took up consumerism as the direction for our development. Then there is this issue of free market economy. And we somehow assume that free market economy will shape the future of the mankind. Okay? And India was very fortunate to have started with public sector undertakings, etc. But down the line, we again fell in this trap of free market economy. Free market economy will never do research on the development of vaccines which are required for pandemics like this. You require a certain amount of government funding and assistance. And perhaps we have to relook at this whole concept. Perhaps what is required is a certain level of the socialist model that we had in Russia, etc., where we say that the basic physiological need has to be met through government support. Okay. So when we are talking of basic physiological need, we are not only talking of housing, but we are talking of health also. And we say the government has to ensure through the taxes, etc., that yes, the health is assured. If today India was a sound position as far as chloroquine was concerned, it was because there was a company, I think it was Bengal Pharmaceuticals in Calcutta, which was making this chloroquine. And then under public sector undertaking, we created some PSU, which took up this and was into manufacturing of chloroquine. Somehow after that, it continued in the private sector also. It is natural also to retain our rank. This is another thinking that it is natural to retain our rank in the above and improve our rank in the above. Means essentially that our ranking as far as consumption, production is concerned, and as far as GDP is concerned. And we have seen last few years, and there was this talk that India is the 5th largest economy and will become the 3rd largest economy and will become a 5 trillion economy and so on and so forth. I'm sure this type of a thinking is going to undergo change. It was never the part of our traditional thinking. We also assume that it is okay, it is perfectly okay to contain anybody who threatens our position in the above pursuit. And it was in this, in response to these things that we impose sanctions, economic sanctions against Iran and North Korea and so on and so forth. Today we realize that we are, all of us are so vulnerable. Okay, our tanks, missiles, bombs have no significance whatsoever. There is another thinking that only the fittest should survive. And when this coronavirus comes in, then what is happening is, forget about the fittest, like cowards, we are all going into lockdowns and keeping away. So this is how a paradigm shift in our thinking is taking place. And that is why this pandemic is going to bring about a change in our thinking. Let us hope so. So SARS-CoV-2 has really questioned all our assumptions. But it may have sent us into hiding. Services in manufacturing have been shut down. The jostling of crowds in our cities simply disappeared. But the air has become cleaner. Water bodies and rivers have become clear. The sky turned blue. Milky Way once again became visible. So apart from man, the rest of the ecosystem has found that SARS-CoV-2 is the greatest disruptive innovation which benefits the entire ecosystem. It offers a faint hope of man's learning to live in symbiosis with nature. And I think this is what I'm emphasizing, and I've been emphasizing last few years in my various talks, that we have to look at the nature and how the nature is able to uh, be able to be so creative and yet so sustainable. Okay, we stand just nowhere when it comes to the creativity and the technological excellence that we find in nature. One thing that happens is that in nature, evolutionary learnings are retained and passed on. So we may talk of evolution of species, but it is much more than evolution of species. It is evolution of the whole methodology of, um, of evolution itself, of the methodology of the direction in which we have to evolve. Okay? And this has been a very important insight for me, which considerably changed my thinking. Now, if you look at viruses perhaps is one of the earliest creatures on Earth. So the Earth belongs much more to viruses than it belongs to us. If you take a liter of coastal seawater, then there are more viruses in that liter of water than there are human beings on Earth. So the point essentially is that this talk of that we have to fight with coronavirus is nonsense. It is there. It is there. It will be there. We have to come to terms with it. And this has been so in all diseases. It is we who have to come to terms. It's only in case of smallpox that we have been able to eradicate it after so many years. But we still don't know what will happen in the future because smallpox virus has been retained by many people, many countries. And who knows, it may get leaked out, it can create havoc. Now, Corona has really broken all the man-made rules, and that is why we found ourselves running into seclusion and running into our houses and locking ourselves up and so on. It has really hit us under the belt. The only hope is that we have to learn to live in symbiosis with nature. This is absolutely essential. And the only way to do that is to understand how is it that nature is able to be so creative and sustainable. And what are the axioms it follows? In this talk, I will not go into the axioms, but we will cover that in a later talk. But my talk or my TED talk on YouTube entitled The Values That Shape Complex System is focused in that direction. So nature is a complex system, and what are the rules that complex systems follows? And there are certain rules that all complex systems follows. Whether it's a university or it's a city or it's a country or it's an organization, certain rules everybody has to follow. Not only this, even a flock of birds that you see in the morning sky, they are making these maneuvers, very interesting maneuvers in the sky. They are also following a set of rules. There's nobody who's guiding them. Okay? Nobody is leading the orchestra. It's just that every bird is following a set of rules. And because they are following those set of rules, they are able to perform those excellent maneuvers without colliding with each other. Man-made environment also has to pick up those set of rules which will enable them not to collide with nature. The way we are going is totally nonsensical. It is anyway not sustainable. Now, as I was saying, that nature has arrived at some wisdom that enables it to adapt, evolve, and flourish. And it is extremely creative and yet sustainable. We need to understand that, and we should definitely try to understand. to evolve a post-COVID-19 action plan, we need to understand how design manifests in the man-made world. And then we need to understand the axioms in evolutionary nature. We have to understand the nature of thinking itself. And I think the human brain has all evolved in response to the wisdom that I'm talking of is latent in the evolutionary world, in the biological world, in the ecosystem. So the human brain has the capacity of thinking correctly. Somehow it is not given the chance to do that because the set of values that we have picked up is what pushes it in a wrong direction or a different direction. Now let me share this. Perhaps some of you may have seen this diagram earlier. It's a very favorite diagram of mine. And here what I'm saying is that the horizontal axis is the axis of creativity. So you can have creativity which is technical in nature. You can have creativity which is emotional in nature. The vertical axis is the axis of care. And if you reflect, you see, either you would live for yourself or you would live for somebody else, okay? Or you would live for a combination of somewhat for yourself and somewhat for others. So this element of care is always there in our thinking. Then there is creativity, which is always there. So I just took up these two parameters and say, okay, let's take these two parameters, the parameter of care and the parameter of creativity, and then figure out how these two parameters actually influence the man-made design world. Okay? So vertical axis is the axis of care, as I mentioned. At the top is hedonistic. Here what is happening is that you are caring more for yourself and less for others. And that is why you will see in this diagram, I have spelled out hedonistic with capital, large capital letters, and ascetic is with small letters. But as you go down, ascetic is in larger letters and hedonistic is in smaller letters. Essentially, what we are saying is that in any situation, you would have a combination of both caring for yourself and caring for others. In the horizontal axis, there was creativity, which was emotional in nature, and there was creativity, technical in nature. And there cannot be 100% technical creativity because anything that has to exist and has to belong to the people and to the culture has to have an emotional content. And that is why there is an immense importance of industrial design in society. We may have been ignoring it for many decades, but whatever it is, it has to come. We have to come around and we have to accept it. Okay? So let me move forward. Now in this diagram, what I'm trying to show is that this understanding is very deeply embedded in our traditional thinking, in our spiritual thinking. So if you look horizontally, we have defined Saraswati and we also defined Vishwakarma. And Vishwakarma is more for technical creativity, whereas Saraswati is for emotional creativity. Emotional creativity domain is the domain of art, of music, of poetry, of storytelling, and things like that, okay? Of emotions, filmmaking. Whereas technical creativity is more to do with engineering, with making automobiles, with spaceships, space suits, and so on and so forth. So the mere fact that we in India have differentiated between these two forms of creativity, Saraswati and Vishwakarma, is very, very significant. And I think we as a culture must recognize this. Once we recognize this, engineering and art can coexist. It is not two different worlds. Okay, C.P. Snow had said, East and West, the twain should never meet, or some such thing. It's nonsense. We have to meet. We have to be together. Okay? Then, if you look at the vertical axis, there is this very beautiful story of Samudra Manthan. So, what it is saying is that creative, or let's say caring for oneself and caring for others is both very important, and they both have to work together. Okay, so in the Samudra Manthan, it became necessary for the Asurs and the Devtas to participate. And as far as the Asurs were concerned, you would notice and you'll recall that they were all bothered about their valor, their strength, and so on and so forth. Whereas Devtas were more concerned with helping others and caring for others and so on. This differentiation is further brought out in another story, and it is the story of Ganesh and Kartikeya. So Narad Muni gives them a challenge and says, whoever goes around the earth and travels first, or comes first, will get this mango as a reward. Okay? And Kartikeya, in a very technical fashion, he thinks in a very technical terms. He jumped on his peacock and literally went around the earth. Okay, and what was happening? How did Ganesh approach this whole issue? Ganesh just said, "My mother and father Shiv and Parvati is the creator of this earth, so I just go around my creator of this earth." So he's approaching the issue from a very emotional viewpoint, whereas Kartikeya is approaching it from a very technical viewpoint. And to me, it's quite interesting and surprising that Kartikeya is worshipped so extensively in the South. And the people in the South is so much into all the technical aspects of thinking, tremendously engrossed in it, whether it is IT and ISRO and DRDO and so on and so forth. So it's good to give a thought to it, that why these stories were actually created and then passed on through generations. Okay, so I'm not saying here that these are real stories or not real stories. That is not the point. Point is that we saw that there is a significance in this story, and that is why we passed it on. So it's important to understand what was the significance in this story. Going further, then we see that the hedonistic pursuits would require a lot of ambition, dominance, extravagance, and that is the type of things that you find in the Asurs, whether it is Ravan or it's Ans and so on and so forth. Whereas the ascetic would require altruism and sharing and leanness and so on and so forth. That's what you find in Mahavir and Buddha and so on. And technical thinking would require rationality and measurement and repeatability, whereas emotion would require concern for others, being able to cope with fuzzy concepts and sentiments and feelings. Okay, so what is very interesting is, and that's what I would like to talk of more when I sometimes give a talk on thinking, the nature of thinking, okay, and how and what governs the course of our thinking. And I think this is very important to understand. And it is these values which govern the course of our thinking. When as part of our education, let us say I'm at IIT Kanpur and I'm becoming an engineer, information is one aspect of my learning there. It is the values, the professional values that I pick up is the most important part. And these values have to do with rationality, measurement, and repeatability when it comes to engineering. And when I go to Royal College of Art and study industrial design, then I study another set of values and imbibe another set of values, just to do with emotions and feelings and so on and so forth. And here I have further expanded those values that I'm talking of, which are associated with each of these directions of access. Here I give you an idea of the creative industry. And creative industry is a very significant component. Unfortunately, it was so much part of our traditional culture that we have ignored it. We thought we almost took it for granted. And we built up engineering institutes, but we neglected the arts institutes and design institutes. So whether it's magic shows or stand-up comedy, or it is making films or designing festivals or street plays, this is part of this effort to manufacture emotions, to experience emotions. It is part of the creative industry. And on the other hand, there is the manufacturing of products and services, which have to do with delivery of items which are manufactured, material which is processed. So whether it is making bread or making muffins and cakes, or it is shift cultivation, or it is the Amul model, where we are bringing people together and forming cooperatives, or it is making maxillofacial implants, or it is manufacturing cars. Okay, so you see that manufacturing cars and maxillofacial implants is more on the technical side. Okay, when it comes to Amul Cooperative, it is on the technical side. It is also more on the aesthetic side. Okay, if you look at making of bread and muffins, it's more on the emotion side. Okay, and so you'll be able to understand this much more as I go along. Here is examples of jewelry. Okay, so we have Maharaja of Patiala at the top. He's all dressed up in his fabulous diamonds, which he was very famous for, and he gifted quite a few of them to Queen Victoria. Here is a girl in Hawaii, dressed up with flowers as jewelry. Okay, so it's a more emotional expression of jewelry, you see, embodiment of jewelry. Whereas in case of Patiala, Maharaja of Patiala, he is wearing these diamonds, and you have to go to some Golconda mines, and you have to take the diamonds there, and you have to cut and polish, and then you have to string them together, and see amount of effort that goes into it. So making of jewelry has a much higher carbon footprint as compared to jewelry made of flowers. And then there is Shiva. His jewelry is the snake that he's wearing around his neck, or the Rudraksh mala. Okay, and then you could have jewelry which is made up of very, very extremely technical items like a PCB board with IC chips and so on and so forth. Okay, so the point essentially is that design can manifest in many ways, many forms, and the form it takes is essentially governed by the values that drives our thinking. So if it is a technical product, my mind, my brain is driven by a set of values which belong to the domain of technical pursuit. This is what we have to understand. And I think if we understand that, it would really help us a lot in evolving our educational curriculum. If you go to the best universities, MIT, Harvard, what are they doing? They're cultivating these values in the people. As far as information and knowledge is concerned, it's all available. But you are able to imbibe these values when you work with teachers, with gurus, who have actually internalized those values very deeply into them. Here is another example of clothing. On the emotional side, you have a bridal sari. On the aesthetic side, you have a monk's clothing, monk's robe. On the technical side, you have the space suit. And on the hedonistic side, you have the gladiator suit. And they all are driven by a different set of values. And once you have those set of values, thinking is very spontaneous. It just takes you in that direction. It enables you to perform the appropriate creative skill. Okay. If you have any question, please do ask. I'll be very, very happy. Okay. Then here is some examples of tailoring. So we've seen tailoring in our homes. At least some of us have. My generation has, definitely. We all had a sewing machine at home. Yeah. Many of our dresses at home, at least for the children, it was all done by sisters and mothers, so on and so forth. It's the grown-up who would go to the tailor. And then there is the rafugar, for example, and the person who does the darning. And I think he's a master in this aesthetic art, using the least amount of the resources to build a creation. So if it's a damaged cloth, they'll be able to take that needle and thread and recreate the weave of the clothing. And so perfectly that often it becomes impossible to find out where the problem was. And then there is as a technical example, I took up this story of Gulliver's Travel. And Gulliver was extremely tall, and he had landed up, or let's say in comparison, he wasn't tall. He landed up in a place which was inhabited by Lilliputians. And the Lilliputians were the size of a thumb. So very, very small creatures. And they were given the task of stitching some garments for Gulliver. Now, these are small creatures, and how do you measure and stitch garments of this huge monster size figure called Gulliver? So they came up with a technical solution to the problem. And the solution is very well expressed in this book. It says, twice round the thumb is once round the waist, once round the wrist, okay? And twice round the wrist is once round the neck. And twice round the neck is once round the waist. So by merely measuring the dimensions of the thumb, they are able to extrapolate the other dimensions. Now, this is a very technical solution to the problem. See, so it requires a very different mental set. And then, of course, you have the garment manufacturers sitting in rows, and one person is just making collars, and another person is making cuffs, and another person is stitching pockets. And so it's an exercise which is done in a mass production, immense amount of energy, and human participation is less, machine participation is more. People are organized to work as gears in a larger mechanism. They're playing a small role. Whereas when my mother or my sister is stitching garments, they're looking at the garment more holistic fashion. They're stitching the garment for a particular person, okay? For that particular person's liking and so on. So there is a difference in the approach. I have been wondering that why this garment industry was not put into action for stitching masks and coveralls. And we should have done it. And I don't know. The way we think is really surprising. Anyway, here is another example. You have Mirabai, and you have Lord Mahavir, and you have Edison, and you have Kans. So different personalities, very distinct different personalities, subscribing to different set of values, different mindset, different temperaments. And again, we are mapping them in this very simple diagram, which is having only two variables, caring and creativity. Here is another example. Mother Teresa, Radha, an executive, lady executive, and Lady Dracula. Another example, Rover for the Moon, Cinderella's Chariot, a person riding on a donkey, and an armored vehicle. So armored vehicle is also carrying one or two people only, and the donkey is also carrying one or two people. But the mindset is different. You have Fatehpur Sikri in the top quadrant. You have multi-story buildings, residential complex, which is a very technical solution of providing all the facilities in limited space. You have a farmhouse, and you have a hut in the village, which is made up of materials which have come from the nature itself. So the carbon footprint for Fatehpur Sikri is very high compared to the carbon footprint of the hut in the village. Similarly, you would have fruits and vegetables as far as food is concerned, or you could have tandoori chicken, or you could have Pepsi Cola, which has no nutritional content, has only emotional value, thanks to the sponsorship of all the film stars, etc. Okay. Or you could have Complan, which is a very technical solution to a drink which has all the necessary minerals and vitamins. Then on the technical side, you have a meal for the International Space Station, and you can have ice cream on the emotional side, or you could have freshly cooked food, or you could have pre-cooked heated meals, which you just have to heat in. Similarly, you look at packaging. So down below on the aesthetic side, how you have used natural materials to package a fruit, or you may use plastic bags for carrying it, or you may wrap it in golden foil, give a more emotional content with a ribbon at the top, lot of gold color, or you may have Tetra Pak, which is a very technical solution to the requirement of preserving food items. I go a little deeper and say, okay, let me look at mapping of the different systems of healing. Till now, I have been just looking at 4 just in order to make it more clear to you as to how we are mapping it. Okay. If you look at transplants and cloning, it's falling on in the hedonistic direction, whereas Ayurveda and meditation would fall in the ascetic domain. It requires very small amount of inputs. Okay. If you look at acupuncture and surgery, again, it's on the technical side. And psychiatry and faith healing is more on the emotional side. Psychiatry would be more on the emotional side and the hedonistic side, whereas faith healing would be more on the emotional side and the aesthetic side. Okay? So you see, you are able to map them on a matrices which is based on the amount of energy and the material and effort that goes into making it, and what part of my brain it is stimulating, what it is catering. Now, point essentially is another point that I would like to emphasize. Again, taking up the cues from Karthikeya and Ganesh episode, and Saraswati and Vishwakarma. When a product first comes into being, okay, then it's a very technical solution to a problem. And here I take the example of a candle. When it was first made, it was a wonderful technical solution to a problem. And the problem was that I have to have a container which will have the fuel. Okay, wax was used as the fuel. Wax was also used as the container. Then there is a wick, and the wick will pick up the wax, the fuel, and will burn. And the wick, as it burns, it always retains its length because the wax keeps diminishing. So if you compare a candle with a lantern, for example, you see how lantern is so much more complex. You have to have a handle in order to carry a lantern. You have to have a container to hold the liquid fuel. And you have to have an adjustment device to raise and lower the wick. Whereas the candle has nothing of the sort. So it's a profound technical solution to that problem. Okay? But once the candle becomes part of our society and culture, then it must have emotional values. So today, if you go to a shop which is selling candles, you'll see 200 varieties of candles. And they're candles for different occasions. Because now you require emotions to be embedded. It is become part of the society and culture. And this is exactly why today India wants design to be there. Because technology has been embedded into our culture. It is becoming part of the culture. And the products by itself, purely on the basis of being an outstanding functional product, will not be adequate and sufficient. You have to have emotional values. Take a look at the example of IBM PC. Excellent product that IBM came up with. It was a very open architecture. It could grow in any direction depending on what people would want it to do. But they never bothered about the emotional values. Whereas Apple bothered about the emotional values of the product. So today, Apple is in the forefront merely on the basis that they are able to put emotions into their product. And this is very important. Apple today is charging a premium price for their products. People are buying it because it caters to the people's needs and aspirations. It is not just a functional product. Okay? That, of course, it has to answer, but it requires something more. So this is the basic thing, and what I'm emphasizing is that in design education also we have been emphasizing on the creative part. We have not been emphasizing on the care part. And I think the design education has to focus. Design educators have to focus a little more, much more on the care part. It is only when creativity addresses care that it becomes meaningful. Without care, creativity is meaningless. So I think it's very important to consciously bring the element of care and be able to create matrices to evaluate whether the design solution is able to care or not care, and to what extent it is caring. So here I'm trying to differentiate between intelligence, creativity, inventiveness, and innovation. I think there's a lot of confusion in this domain also. Intelligence, if you look at any IQ test, intelligence is essentially the ability to see a relationship or configuration. So they give you a set of, let's say, possibilities, and based on those possibilities, you are supposed to predict the fifth one or the sixth one. So you have to come up with a solution which is based on the data that is given to you. Now, to be able to process that is what is called intelligence. Creativity is the ability to see many different relationships or configurations. Okay? Intelligence is to do with one solution. So in all the engineering education, we were given tests where there was one solution to the problem. And if you came up with that one solution, you got the maximum marks. But in creative education, we pose problems and we expect students to come up with a number of solutions. So creativity has a lot to do with our ability to see many different relationships. In intelligence, you find one solution and you rest. You are satisfied. In creativity, you find one solution, it's not enough. You have to look for more solutions. Okay? So unless you are able to find more solutions, you are no good. When it comes to inventiveness, it is ability to see new, viable, and meaningful relationships. Creativity has nothing to do with meaningful relationships. It is just the ability to see different configurations. But here you're talking of meaningful relationships. So when you go for an IPR, you go for a patent, they say, is it novel? Is it something which person in the state of the art will not be an obvious solution to him or her? Does it make a sound business proposition? Is from business viewpoint it is meaningful? So there is this concept of novelty and the meaningfulness from the business viewpoint. Meaningfulness from some technical viewpoint, meaningful to somebody. Okay? So inventiveness is more in this domain. If you look at innovation, it has a lot to do with coming up with a solution which is socially and culturally meaningful solution. Now, when we are moving into the post-pandemic situation, okay, then we'll have to look at solutions, or innovation in that context would mean coming up with solutions which are culturally meaningful. Here, culturally would mean not human culture, but also the ecological culture. So innovation would now have to be redefined. This is a challenge for us designers. This is a challenge for the technical experts. This is a challenge for the entire society, that now we have to think in terms of not just the market or not the purchaser only, but we also have to think of the product and how it will be used and how it will behave and what effect it would have in its entire life cycle. So now we are today talking of cradle to cradle. Okay, so innovation is happening in a much larger context. Now, if you notice another thing, that as far as intelligence and creativity is concerned, it's more to do with objects. But when you go down towards inventiveness, innovation, it moves towards values. And this is the thing that I have been emphasizing in my earlier presentation, that values are very important. Values are important for innovation. And in all our education system, we have to emphasize and be able to figure out how we can discuss and nurture these values. These values are profession oriented. They belong to a domain of thinking, a domain of expression. Okay, and this is what we have to understand. These are not social, cultural values, goody-goody values, values given by some leader or some saying, no, it has nothing to do with that. It is to do with the style of our thinking, because we feel that values govern the direction of our thinking. Beautiful word, innovation. Just for summarizing, it has three components: nova, which is newness; over, there has to be a seminal idea in it, and it must draw ovation. Okay? This is very important. Yeah, that you have designed something which is socially and culturally meaningful. SARS-CoV-2 may be drawing ovation from the rest of the creatures, living creatures. Okay, we may be suffering, but the rest of the ecosystem is applauding. Okay? So for them, it may be an innovation, and that is where we have to rethink. We have to stop thinking from our very narrow-minded pursuits in life. This is just to focus you a little more in the direction of the values that govern the ecosystem. And if you look at any organism, it's important that it must have a boundary. It has to have a casing. It must be encompassed in something. And so virus would have a covering around it. Okay. It is also important that it should be able to interact with its environment. It should be able to interact with other species. And this is growth, sharing, caring, and collaboration. So in nature, you are talking of the hedonistic values, where the individual is important, the virus is important, the bacteria is important, but its ability to interact with other species is also important. Its ability to interact with the environment in order to grow and flourish and to multiply is also important. So when you think of products, please think in these two terms: how it is interacting with the rest of the environment. Okay. Is it well protected? So you see this virus, and RNA is the main thing which has to be taken forward, which has to be preserved. It is inside a protein capsule, okay? And then you have receptors at the top. So there is a boundary which protects it, but then there are receptors are there for it to interact with others, okay? And we have to really be bothering that this coronavirus, which is creating problems for us, has really developed these receptors, these, let's say, the hand-holding devices for it to interact with the environment. And it's developed them extremely well. And in nature, what happens is that information and knowledge and wisdom is never lost. It remains there. So other creatures, other viruses are also likely to take this. It will be retained. And so things are not going to be very easy in the future. That's what I feel. And so it is very, very essential that we have to develop a method of working with our environment, which may mean, of course, maybe developing more immunity or not transgressing the boundaries. And if you look at bats, do you see bats moving on the ground? They are all hanging from the tree or from the roof of a cave, okay? Whereas a Pangolia is something which burrows underground, lives on the ground. So nature has created boundaries, okay? Says Mongolia, you have to be here, Mongolia, sorry, and the bat, you have to be there. They were not interacting in the real environment. But then, you know, what has happened in the Wuhan market? We brought all these creatures and we forced them to be living together and sharing their byproducts, whether it is sweat or it is blood or it's excreta. And it became a wonderful place for new mutations to happen. I remember in my time, the old ladies would be concerned that in the masala dal, you will have a separate spoon for salt, separate spoon for haldi, separate spoon for mirchi, dhania, so on and so forth. In other words, what they were, perhaps the thinking behind it, we've forgotten many of these traditional knowledges and the rationale behind it. But perhaps there was a meaning in it because each one of them has its own biome, it has its own virome, okay? Let's not mix them together. And so with this few thoughts, I come to the end. And now let's have the most interesting part of the talk, okay? Which is the question and answer session. So the house is open for question and answers.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. So I think that was a very insightful journey of the past and present through very interesting examples. And you know, learning to live in symbiosis is something we should all understand and practice, whether it is designing of products or whether it is our lifestyle. I think, like we say that, you know, questions have answers, probably problems have solutions, and that is something which you have also emphasized. I think I would like to start with a question that, you know, in this current situation of pandemic, we have seen a very interesting boom of DIY culture, which is a do-it-yourself culture. Now we could see even kids and, you know, people there in their homes, they've started making their own mask with the materials available. So how do you see that with respect to the innovation culture of the country?
Extremely important. And I think this is one thing which should be encouraged. India always had a very sound cottage industry. I remember my mother was able to do many things at home. They were able to take old clothing and make them into curries, make them into nivar. Recycling of clothing was a very standard thing. So there was this culture of doing it home. Okay? Whereas today what has happened is that we have moved towards manufactured goods, and thereby we have forgotten creativity and culture. The day 24th, when the lockdown was imposed, that night I just sat down and wrote a paper as to what needs to be done. And at that time, they did not see the importance of masks. We were emphasizing the importance of social distancing. To me, for one thing, I didn't like the word social distancing because social distances were anyway too much in the country. And I think it was more important to see our position with the reference to the virus. So the biological distancing was important. And the moment you put on a mask, you are increasing the biological distance. If you are having the virus, less of it is coming out. it is going a lesser distance. If somebody else has a virus, then you are creating a barrier. You are inhaling less of it. And so I felt that it would be so wonderful if the entire community of India were to get into manufacturing masks. And I remembered Lal Bahadur Shastri in 1965, when this Indo-Pakistan war took place, and he came on the radio and he gave a talk. And he said, let us all grow vegetables in our kitchen gardens. And he issued an order to all the district magistrates and collectors that any land that is there, vacant land, okay, anybody who wants to grow anything in that land, he or she should be allowed to do so. You can charge 1 rupee and give him the right to do that. Now, this type of a thing we should have done. We should have announced that everybody will stitch masks. And if you really look at India's population, the amount of masks we require, it's an immense amount. And the government could have provided better material, and then we can do the stitching. There's no high tech in it. We all are capable of doing it. The entire garment industry could have swung into. But somehow there was such a fear about the technical aspects of the mask and the technical aspects of the coverall. The businessmen have mystified the technology. And so they have taken the cottage industry, they have usurped the cottage industry. And the homes and the cottage have lost the potentiality and the confidence to create things. Decentralization would be a key thing. Once again, our government is emphasizing the importance of self-reliance. If you look at the first 50 years of our development, self-reliance, indigenous development was a very, very important issue. It was the main slogans which drove our planning. And I think this cultivation of creativity in the home, decentralization of manufacturing, ability to meet our essential physiological needs by ourselves and through the efforts of the government is extremely important. The Maharajas in this country were always responsible for making these ponds because it was addressing a physiological need. Okay? We cannot live this to the free market economy. Free market economy will look at profit, will not look at these things. So I agree with you that we have to give an emphasis on this home manufacturing, home creativity. I think this is another direction in which design education will have to go. I remember in my time, there was great importance of many of these catalogs, design catalogs, which had designs in it and spelled out the method of coming up with that design. So ability to come up with specification and standards and distributing it to the people. It's becoming an open source knowledge. This will become important. So IPR, the importance of IPR will diminish. Open source will become more important. Home manufacturing will become more important. Do it yourself will become more important. This is inevitable. Next question.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. So we have a question from a student, Abhish, and so basically I'll reframe that question. So during design education, we are taught about sustainable design and practices, but at the same time, we are also, informed about manufacturing processes using plastics and steel. So how do we see both of these things together? I mean, at one point it seems to be like a virodhabas, but at the same time, it feels like to be a genuine thing. How do you see that?
You see, what is happening is that at present, when they are talking of sustainability, they are essentially talking of less wastage, okay, more conservation of energy, material, and that is the only thing that they are doing. But there are other thoughts as in sustainability. There is the deep green and so on and so forth, where they are going deeper into the values, into the lifestyle, the way we are going to live. Okay, so coming up with products which will last for 100 years, which have a life of 50 years, it's doable. But somehow down the line, what is happening is the manufacturers, they are now telling engineers to cut down the life of the product. And that's where I again remind you of this video, light bulb conspiracy. Please do take a look at it. And then you will realize that how the shortening of life was consciously cultivated in the design profession. And consumerism was encouraged, short life of products was encouraged. So this is not the way to go. We'll have products which will have a long life, products which are upgradable, products which can be manufactured. I really wish the government were to announce that we will give special incentives for manufacturers who design products with a 10-year warranty. And that would change things a lot. The country is very huge. There are so many people who are without the conveniences of technical innovation. They need it. So there is no need to throw away product. It does not mean that I have to live with the product for 50 years. Okay. Maybe I'm fed up with it. I can afford it. I'm a very indulgent person. Maybe I'm more on the hedonistic side. So I will say, okay, no, I must buy the latest iPad or iPhone. That's okay. I buy it. But then my old phone is still serviceable. Somebody else can use it. And I think this is the direction we have to start thinking. This is inevitable. We just can't do without it. So I hope it answers your question that when it comes to sustainability, we have to go deeper into how is it that nature is so creative and it is so sustainable.
Right, sir. So we have a question from Pawan Kumar, and it's more in terms of, I believe, startup idea and entrepreneurship. So the question is, whether availing distributorship for the vaccines can be a good startup initiative in the days to come.
Yeah, anything which will facilitate. Because you see, what is going to happen is that once the vaccine is created, of course, it will be useful not now, but it would be useful in the next mutation of the virus or the next cycle of infection. Okay, so imagine this huge population will have to be vaccinated. Okay, so you require distributors, definitely. Not only just distributors, you require people who can vaccinate people in such large numbers. You have to develop new devices for vaccination. Okay, so what will be those devices? Will it be based on just simply inhaling? Or will it have to be injected? Or will it be a patch which you wear on your skin? There are many directions it could take. So we don't know at present. But for an entrepreneur who is thinking in this direction, you should explore all these different directions. Vaccination through the nasal route, oral route, maybe through an injection, maybe through a patch, whatever it is. So think of this direction. After all, how do we develop immunity? We are inhaling, or we are taking small quantity of that virus. When we take a small quantity, then our immune system is not overwhelmed. It is able to figure out, it has the time to study and come up with a device to contain that virus. Okay? So that is also an immunization process. So there could be many routes to immunization. And I think distributorship is a good thing, but add something more to that distributor. It is not just giving a container to somebody else. So as a technical person, as a designer, you should be able to innovate and think in terms of delivery systems also. Okay.
Sir, I think that gives us clues to a lot many designers and students who are listening to you in terms of ideas and what to build probably in their future design projects. We have a question from Mr. Ghosh asking that whether patenting and innovation is technical, hedonistic, or emotional.
Patenting, the act of patenting?
Yes, sir.
I think if you look at the various possibilities, okay. So one is putting it in the open source. So if you put it in the open source, obviously you are sharing. You are not looking at some remuneration or feedback, or you're not preventing another person from using that knowledge. Whereas when you are patenting it, obviously you are imposing a constraint on others' capacity to utilize it. So if you patent it, obviously it's more on the hedonistic side because you are caring about yourself. You say, this is my thought, this is my idea. I should get the advantage of it. Somebody can only benefit from it if they pay me some money. Okay. Whereas there is another person who says, here is a wonderful idea, should serve the society. So let's put it in the open source. Even in the Indian Patent Act, I think there are certain categories of innovation which fall outside the domain of patenting. At least in the earlier regime, the medical products were not patentable. Okay? So this type of things will definitely arrive. Today I find many universities are coming up with solutions for ventilators, which they are sharing on the open platform for anybody to make. Okay? These ventilators can be very, very simple. They can be very complex also. And they become complex when the patient is in an advanced stage of ill health. Okay? But if you're in the early stages, merely making oxygen available and retrieving the carbon dioxide is good enough. So you don't have to have a pipe which is inserted through your windpipe. Okay? Merely having a mask or a fitting for your nose, which is delivering oxygen-rich air and drawing it out, is good enough. And they are putting these in the open source. Linux is a good effort. Operating systems. I see this open source is a growing domain. I have no doubt about it. It's for you. If you think that you are very good at creating ideas, you have many, many ideas that you can create, no end to it, then you will like to put them in the open source. Okay? If you think you have only one idea which you have hit by accident and you may not get another idea in your life, then you would like to patent it.
Okay, so we have lots and lots of questions pouring in. I think we'll be able to take one or two maximum. So there is a question.
What you can do is you can post me the rest.
Okay, sir. Okay, sure. I think that can be done. I think I would like to invite Sambhav sir for the closing address and how he felt about the talk. Sambhav sir, please.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor Das, for giving such a mesmerizing talk. In fact, we are really honored to have you on this occasion. We could not have you offline. We wanted to invite you for some talk at UPRD also, but somehow we could not manage to do it. But thanks to this lockdown that we could listen to you. And this was a very insightful talk that you gave. In fact, earlier I was thinking of writing something to speak at the end, but when you started talking about values, it is something close to my heart, and I thought that I can speak by myself. In fact, let me inform that we are currently also running workshops on universal human values. And in fact, the officials of AICT have also attended, and vice chancellors and deans and directors are also attending. So rightly pointed out, sir, that we have to shift to the values, and we can see that due to absence of values only we are locked in our houses, and somehow only the human race has to be blamed for it. It is nothing to do with the rest of the nature. So you pointed out that how this wrong assumptions in the human being have created so many problems. And now linking this kind of pandemic situation to the design, talked about the 4 dimensions: hedonistic versus aesthetic, technical versus emotional, and that was also quite insightful. You also talked about the 5 abilities of a designer: cognition, intelligence, creativity, inventiveness, and innovation. And you rightly mentioned that ultimately we have to move to the value part, from the object to the value part, and then only our design can be sustainable and the human race can sustain. In fact, yesterday only I came across a video that was mentioning that if you take the whole lifespan of this earth as a year, human race has appeared in the last 5 seconds. So we have to really be aware what we are doing and where we are heading to. I would also like to thank Professor Vinay Pathak sir, our Honorable Vice Chancellor, because of whom only this webinar series could get started. And we are really thankful to him for the motivation that he has been providing to us. We are also
just a minute. I would like to thank Professor Pathak for coming and
yes,
talk. I hope it was meaningful to him.
Maybe sir can only hint at it.
So please, I want a question from Professor Pathak.
Okay, sir. Director, sir, probably he's not able to listen to us, sir.
It doesn't matter. Okay.
Fine, sir.
Continue.
In fact, I would like to invite you, sir, to the inaugural of the next workshop that we are going to start. So I will be sending an invitation for that also. If you come, we'll really feel honored to have you on the occasion. So thank you all. We had so many questions from the participants. We could not have it, but we are grateful to Das sir that he has asked you to mail the questions and he will be responding to all of them. So thank you all once again. Thank you, my colleagues. And thank you, Jitenji, for organizing this. And thank you, Zoom, also, for giving us this online platform. Thank you all.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor, sir, for coming for this talk. Thank you very much.
Sir. So thanks a lot, everyone, for joining in. We are sorry we could not take in all the questions, but we have noted those questions and we'll be mailing it to sir, and we'll try and reply back to all of you. Also, we have this entire week lined up with interesting talks, so please join in tomorrow as well. We'll use the same link. And tomorrow we are having Professor J. Kumar, who is from IIT Kanpur, who will be talking about design thinking. So with that, we'll be closing today's day. Thanks a lot for joining in. Once again, thank you, Das sir, for coming and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all.